combination of engineering and business is fantastic. It's quite accidental on my side. One thing engineering does teach you is the ability to take a problem and break it into its subcomponents and go deep into each of the subcomponents and solve them. So you really learn that kind of differential problem-solving kind of approach to life. Conversely, what business teaches you is the ability to look across different disciplines and approach a problem from many different angles, but stay at the higher level and think through more broadly. And this combination of depth and breadth is actually fantastic because it helps you in every walk of life, from parenting, in my case, to work, in our cases, to so much more.
I'm Sam McKenna, and you're listening to the Show Me You Know Me show, a deep dive on the impact of personal connection and empathy from the perspective of some of the world's most successful executives. Our guest today is Sanjay Srivastava. Sanjay is the Chief Digital Officer at Genpact, operating partner at Masagroup Ventures, and chair of the Executive Technology Board. In all of his roles, Sanjay sits at the intersection of people, process, data, technology, and AI. And as if that wasn't enough, he helps incubate, grow, and advise AI and data startups and mentors at 2 digital incubators. With seemingly every company and person trying to learn about AI today, it is so nice to hear about the transformation that's happening from Sanjay's perspective. Can't wait for you guys to listen into this incredible conversation with this incredible human. First, thank you so much for being willing to join us. We're so excited to dive into your story. And I think you have an interesting path to how you've accomplished so much in your life. I find that you have a similar path to so many other people, that you stumbled into computers, I think by accident, and that kind of changed the trajectory of your life. You wanted to be a rocket scientist, and then computers came along, and maybe things went in a different way. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first things first, Sam, just thank you for having me. It's such a rare pleasure. I think pretty much everyone is on a similar journey. I wanted to be a rocket scientist growing up, and I went to an engineering school to study that. Along the way, of course, I got distracted because I started enjoying working with people more than machines. I was doing airflow design on a wing. So, when you fly through the air and your aircraft wing is there, trying to compute how the air flows over the wing and the vortex that it creates. It's very math intensive. Loved it, but kind of hated the non-people part of it. And so I got into business. But my first experience with a computer, you won't believe it, this is kind of dating me. It was with the digital VAX, and most of us don't even know what that is, but it's the sort of thing where there's no UI, you're working at a command language interface. It was just prehistoric. It was like 1,000th the compute power of my iPhone today. It was obvious then, as it is now, that it is changing the trajectory of life. And it was immensely exhilarating to be part of. And so I switched gears. After my business school, I quite accidentally ended up at a firm, landed as a product manager, and built out the first compute servers. And then from there on, it's just one thing after the other.
I love the dating yourself piece, because I mean, it's history. It really is history, right? And you think about where we are now. We're going to get into generative AI and everything, but you think about how far we've come and things that we just didn't even think we could do back then. I'm curious on the people thread. So you don't hear a lot of rocket scientists who say, I really just want to engage more with people. What was it that was missing? Was it the human connection? Was it understanding their stories, team building? What was it for you?
So I was going to engineering school in a town called Kharagpur, which was about 2 hours from where I was previously studying. And because it was only 2 hours away, I'd often come back on the weekends and I'd hang out with my high school friends. And my high school friends all went down business. And so they were studying what was called Bachelor's of Commerce back then. I was in this Bachelor's of Engineering program. As I said, I was computing airflows over aircraft wings and math equations and differential math. And they were sitting there working out, how to sell, how to start businesses, how to interact with people. And I just love that. And so it kind of, I finished my degree. I loved it, by the way. The aerospace engineering is an amazing discipline. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to work. And I then went to business school, which is kind of how I came to the US, by the way, because this was all in India back then. So it was an accident that I ended up in the US. It was an accident that I ended up staying here, but it's been an incredible journey. And I think a lot of it was hanging out with my friends and understanding what they do and then making life choices on a day-by-day basis.
So your parents really blame them, the degenerates of your high school friends, for pulling you into the dark side of people stuff instead of rocket science and everything that you were originally studying.
I think they were eventually fine with it. I tell you one thing, the combination of engineering and business is fantastic. It's quite accidental on my side. One thing engineering does teach you is the ability to take a problem and break it into its subcomponents and go deep into each of the subcomponents and solve them. So you really learn that kind of differential problem-solving kind of approach to life. Conversely, what business teaches you is the ability to look across different disciplines and approach a problem from many different angles, but stay at the higher level and think through more broadly. And this combination of depth and breadth is actually fantastic because it helps you in every walk of life, from parenting, in my case, to, work, in our cases, to so much more.
When you say that, I think about a great critical thinker. I think about somebody who can pull themselves back, right? Undo all these pieces of the puzzle. Where do you think that came from? Do you think that was more your engineering background, your business background?
First off, I would not claim to be any kind of a good critical thinker. So let's just start with just the reality. I do think it's a combination of both of those. I think if I just done business, maybe I would have thought a little differently. And I think if I just done engineering, I would be sort of in the weeds. But I think the combination, and I'm a big believer in intersection of disciplines, and whether it's business engineering or whether it's art, or whether it's linguistics, neuroscience, so many different things. I think the next opportunities for innovating actually come at the intersection of disciplines. And partly that's because, our sciences have advanced so far along that we're kind of almost at the end of that journey.
Tell us about how you ventured to the States. How did that end up happening by accident?
It was a complete accident, including everything after that. So I was in India going to engineering school, kind of wanted to get into business. And I decided at that time I wanted to start an international marketing agency, a business in India. I was growing up there, very comfortable with the lifestyle. India was kind of in this early in this journey of sort of opening up, if you will. And so it was just obvious that there was be a large opportunity, as it's turned out to be the case in sort of the growth that's come from international trade. And I wanted to be right at the center of this early in its thing. And I thought like, hey, what better way to get started than to sort of go overseas and get a degree in international marketing, which is how I ended up here. By the way, international marketing, when I showed up, was like, here's marketing management and here's a few diversity classes. And I'd grown up in Asia all my life in this, really diverse kind of environments. I said, okay, now I got to change my major. And I went into marketing management. And by the way, I mean, just even accidentally, I ended up at the University of Minnesota. And I can tell you exactly how I ended up there. We took a map of the United States and we said, who do we know over here, right? And it turned out in this whole large, world back then, we knew like three people. Like there was like the neighbor's brother is in Minneapolis and so-and-so's, stepsisters here. And so we picked three cities. And then we said, okay, what are the universities in those cities? And then University of Minnesota, which is where I ended up, was in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I show up, and of course, this gentleman's just an amazing guy. So he just showed up at the airport to pick me up, brought me to his home, stayed with him, with their family for 4 or 5 days and moved into my student housing. Turns out he was the head of the Department of Computer Science at the University of Minnesota. So it was a complete surprise, complete accident. And then, of course, I finished my graduate work. I didn't have any money, so I had to work. So I was working for, among other things, started working with 3M, got into some really interesting work at 3M, had to work with the summer, which took me to Hewlett Packard in Colorado. And then just one thing after the other, it just led on.
Let's talk about your astronomically impressive career. You have built and exited 4 startup companies. When you were building that, how did you know each time it was time to move on and to build the next thing?
I don't think I have as good an answer, but I'll tell you what my journey was. I think identifying the pain point and feeling it personally is a large part of it. So my first startup was because I was in a very large corporation. I was running product management for a pretty large size product line in computing. And one of the things I used to do back then was to just get on planes around the world and bring new products to market. It was literally a 2-month process. You come with a new next computer and it's like you'd be on a plane to Sao Paulo and, and Singapore and Sydney. And you're essentially talking to media, you talk to press, you're talking to customers, because that was the way of doing things in person, on the ground, face to face. So I felt the need for the ability to do what you and I are doing today, which is using a video interface to be able to, to speak. And back in the day, this was not existent. So there were 2 companies that were getting started. One was WebEx, which went public, subsequently acquired by Cisco, but that was one company. And the other company was Placeware, which was subsequently acquired by Microsoft. WebEx at the time was one-on-one communication. Placeware was one-to-many education. And we took the opportunity to sort of say one-to-many channel kind of conversation and being able to bring new products to market, which lo and behold was like, I was use case number 1. That's the company we built. And then obviously, things change over time and, computing blew up. The company that acquired our first startup came around. They had a really strong B2C business looking to get into B2B, and we just ended up being a good fit. And so, so that's the story of that one. But over and over again, I think you have to understand the problem. You have to get deep in it. You have to live it and feel it. You have to keep asking the question. I remember this on my third startup. I was interviewing CFOs and I'm saying, this is what I'm planning. What do you think? It's like, hey, we love it. And so what would you buy if I made it? It's like, yeah, we would buy it. And then asking the next question, well, why would you buy? Well, why would you spend money? But don't you have other approaches? You really try and go dig in for areas that you're not personally involved in. But I think you got to feel it, you got to sense it, you got to live it. And then if you know that thing is solid, then I think, the path is much clearer.
You make me think of something that I learned in college, which I thought was one of the best business lessons ever. And it's the concept of serving an underserved market. And it's really thinking about what challenge exists. It's not you being, the next Uber or Lyft or whatever that already exists. And yes, plenty of room for improvement, but gosh, getting that market's going to be tough. What is a challenge that people have? How can we reduce costs, build efficiencies, et cetera, serve that underserved market?
I might even amplify that a little bit because I think then you take that idea and you take it into tech or technology. And what ends up happening is, particularly in Silicon Valley and other parts of the world, you are amongst a group of friends and colleagues that are experiencing kind of the problems at the edge of where today's innovation lies. So they're actually able to see problems that maybe all of us can't really see. So if you find a way to co-locate or situate yourself into that ecosystem, so it isn't just the core fundamental of finding a problem and so on and so forth. It's actually finding these new problems that are going to get bigger that only a few people are experiencing because there are only a few people that are working on the edge of search or on the edge of, quantum or something. And then if you find that problem, then you've got the double advantage because, of what you said. But in addition, there aren't that many people that are close enough to it. And so then you've got a little bit of differential advantage in getting started.
I think you also have a fantastic lesson for any salesperson out there, any entrepreneur out there. And it goes back to the questions you were asking these CFOs. I think so often people will build businesses or they'll go off on their own to be consultants without ever knowing, is this a problem that their core buyer wants? And would they buy from them? And then asking the uncomfortable question, why would you buy? Would you buy from me specifically? What do you need to see to spend money on this? And I think it's such a fabulous hat tip to that because we see so many businesses fail because we didn't think about exactly asking those tough questions to begin with.
Well, people are fundamentally nice, right? And the challenge is they'll say yes to more things than they will buy, right? And so pushing a little bit of the envelope actually helps. It also helps you actually think through the obstacles your clients will go through when they have to sign the paper. Because sometimes we say, would you buy it? Yeah, of course I'd buy it. It's a nice jacket. But it's like, what are the considerations you have to go through to buy the jacket? Now you're thinking about what else do I have in my wardrobe? How does it match? So there's a lot of those things that makes you, and as you hear them, you can think through the buying process. Like you understand that fundamentally it's so important to do.
You currently serve as a venture capitalist, and I think you have 8 portfolio companies that you currently invest in. How do you know when you're doing the interview process? How do you know that an idea that they have will catch on?
I want to be very humble by starting with the fact that in the end, you don't really know. You're making gut decisions and you're making bets. I don't want to sort of say that there's some, exact science behind it. But I think to the point you're making earlier, you have to play in that problem space to be able to understand what's going on. And I'm fortunate. So by the way, I do venture capital, but it's a third of what I do. So I'm in this kind of portfolio career now that I'm told. It also allows me to understand where the problem spaces are, where the needs are in the enterprise tech market. So I'm informed by the work I do in the other thirds of my life. And so the point being that you have to understand kind of where you play in, what the specifics are. And I think that's one of the biggest things I look for. The other thing I look for is obviously the team. But are the founders the right founders? Do they have the right critical thinking? Are they willing to adapt and change? Are they going to move fast? Like a lot of those things come into play. There's so many problem spaces that are vast and large right now. The other thing you look at is what's the competition going to look like? In the arc of time, how is the ecosystem going to evolve? Particularly true, by the way, in AI companies, because there's so much investment that's going in the hyperscalers right now that from a venture perspective, it ends up actually being a very risk. In fact, AI is a very risky space for venture capitalists because the two things that you had, the two big advantages you had, which is you spread your bets in many small investments. Well, AI requires a ton of investment now. So that kind of is in a great setup. And I think the other one is, you're differentially advantaged because you know something that like everyone else doesn't. But at this point in time, everyone knows the power of AI and what it's likely to be able to do. So it's not like you have anything differential there. But I think understanding the specific space and the details of what that company or product is going to do, and then knowing the founders and understanding their mindset are two critical elements.
I think such great points. But even when you think about like the companies that you invest in yourself, what do you think of what's critical when you think about those companies, those teams? What do you look for there?
The reality is you need teams that are exceptional because it's a very hard journey doing startups. What I did when I was building companies, look for people that are way smarter than me. And so you have to have that mindset where you can bring in the talent that are 2x, 3x smarter than you because they're the ones that will create the company. And if you can't do that, then this is not the space for you. It's really, really important. The other thing that I think is super critical is, many people that start a company kind of take all the things that they need to build and kind of put it in a chronological order. But the tendency is to start with a smaller problem and then go to the next problem and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think it's important to completely reverse that cycle. You have to start with the hardest problem first, because if you can't solve it, there's no point doing all the other stuff anyway. And it's a really important lesson that I think I've learned in my career. Solve the hardest problem first. And that allows you to kill bad ideas so fast so you can move on to the next one, which could be a much better idea, as opposed to wasting and sinking 2, 3 years in something and then hitting the wall.
In your work right now with Genpact, right? And that Genpact actually acquired one of your startups. You help C-level executives in Fortune 500 companies digitally transform the business. Now, I think there's some of our listeners who might say, I hear digital transformation all the time. What on earth is that? But let's focus a little deeper. Tell us about the process of that. How do you help these executives do exactly that?
Well, look, I think the problem set is super simple. Most of these companies are very large mainstream corporations you would have heard of. They are clients of ours, and they, as a result, have technology infrastructure that they invested in 10, 20, 30 years ago. Much of it was acquired over the ages. It's a little bit of a gobbledygook of many different things. You come into an environment like that, and what we as a company do is actually make them more efficient. We transform them to be more effective, more closer to the clients, to drive better experiences, grow in revenue, reduce costs, really just be more competitive and sustainable. And so a lot of the work then is about transforming the way they do business today through the infusion of new technology, data, and AI solutions. It's not like you can bolt on AI to an existing workflow to get results. It just doesn't work like that. And this is why it's a challenging thing to do, is because it's not just about technology. It's actually about, understanding the core business process and being able to reimagine that with AI. It's about understanding what data capabilities you have and how do you actually build a foundation so you can harvest and leverage it. It's about understanding the stakeholders in the group and actually championing and managing this massive change. More important now, by the way, with AI than it was 10 years ago with just automation, but all the same, super critical. That journey is a hard journey for any CIO to take on by themselves. And so our work really is helping companies transform by thinking about the data, the technology, the people, the process, the operating models, and driving that holistically to get to actual outcomes. So for us, success is not like if you get some product live, that's not, this is nice, by the way. And we would have kind of ticked off the task list, but that's not really what we're going for. We're looking to drive outcomes and economic results. And that takes more than technology. I did, by the way, came into the company through the acquisition of my last startup. And I have to tell you, I got my knees chopped off, right? I came from a tech background, thought it could solve any problem in the world. And the work we do is across Fortune 500 companies. So these are large mainstream corporations with years of history and therefore legacy technology and other things. And what I realized is actually tech is no longer the long pole in the tent. It's actually people and process and design and, experiences that you deliver. And that was a big learning for me because you can't take a tech-centric approach to solving world problems. You have to combine that with other disciplines. And so it's been a great journey for me. I've learned a lot. I'm very grateful for the experience I had.
I think this is such a good insight. And I think that, even as you come in, best of intentions and all these wonderful things you can do, you're still going to see people who are resistant to that change or say, this is the way that we've always done it. What do you feel about that with AI? Do you feel in the corporate setting that people are resistant to AI coming in? Do you feel they're embracing it, excited?
I think it's a little bit of both, but AI does bring us amazing opportunity, but a much larger challenge because, look, we've done automation I've done it for 10 years now, and it's all very sophisticated and all that. But when you really boil it down, it's super simple. You take any business process, you break it down into each of its parts. You take every single part and you digitize it, and then you reassemble all those parts together. And you've got something that's digitized now. It's faster, it's better, it's probably cheaper. It's definitely more scalable. It's likely much higher quality, all goodness in life, right? What we're finding with AI is that that's not the journey you're on. The reality is once you implement AI, it actually changes the underlying business process itself. The handshakes at both ends change. So they connect in different places in the enterprise. The work that is remaining for human colleagues to do is not like the faster version of what was there before. It's actually entirely new work. So the skilling, the resourcing, the thinking that's required to do that remaining work is now very different. And so it needs operating model change. It needs a business process redesign. And most of all, it needs sort of buy-in and stakeholdership from the rest of your organization so that you can actually embrace these changes. And so I think that the biggest thing that you need to do if you are in a role as a technology leader is balance outside in thinking and inside out thinking, right? So you have to be an outside in leader because if you're not familiar with where the edge of the technology curve is, what the new emerging technologies are, where the venture capital is actually going, what is actually coming through that's going to change the world, then you're sort of missing a piece of the pie. Like you can't really digitize and transform because you don't know what's going to come down the road. You're always designing for yesterday or for today, and that's not going to make sense in the long run. But equally, it's amazing. The other half is being an inside out person because the amount of change you're driving, the level of stakeholdership and sponsorship you need, and therefore the level of credibility you need in the organization to take that position requires you to have spent time inside the company and get to be well known and trusted and so on and so forth. Because in the end, it comes down to trust. And it's super difficult to be an outside in person and an inside out person at the same time.
And I think that that social capital, that relationship capital that you have inside, right, to really move bounds, to make transformation happen is so critical. And I think sometimes people don't even realize how important those relationships are. Sometimes they feel like, well, big shiny title, lots of money, authority, et cetera, is all I need when you really need that internal stakeholder buy-in. But you think about how I think sometimes people do bolt on AI without really understanding its value or if it's even meaningful to their customers. And I think one of the most critical things, what are we solving? What's the benefit? What need? What's the problem, right? That's existing that AI can truly help with? Or are we just slapping it on to say, look, we're AI and shiny, just like everybody else?
I'll give you a great example of that. I was at a colleague recently, they're in the manufacturing segment. If a car were to have a crash, the airbags deploy, the activator that actually makes that second decision, they're the kinds of components made. This is, you can imagine, very high quality, like life
We hope.
preserving kind of thing. And so it went through a goes through very careful quality control because you can't exceed the threshold, you can't be too low, and all that sort of stuff. And they had a process where they had like these engineers that were like trained over years that would, take a look at these things coming off the manufacturing line and you pick it up and you kind of look at it and you rotate it and tons of years of experience. And they had very high quality standards on that. And they said, well, can we automate it and increase the quality standard? Because this is such an important component of what we do. And I think they ran this whole mechanism and they brought these robotic arms and it pick it up and it's going to turn in specified angles and have different bandwidth light frequency light come on it and inspect it, take computer vision, analyze it and all that. And they couldn't exceed the human accuracy testing capability. And then they actually gave the computer science guys a break and said, why don't you guys go take a break? And they brought the mechanists, the people that actually work on it. They say, we're trying to solve this problem and we're trying to automate this. And how do we're trying to increase the quality. And so they start thinking very differently. And in the end, here's what they do today. The same components coming off the manufacturing line, robotic arm goes and picks it up. No light, no computer vision. It takes a tong, like a musical tong, and it hits it at a specified velocity and angle. And it creates it creates a sound. It turns out that the fingerprint of that sound can tell you a lot about the quality of the actuator. And they started exceeding their previous quality levels. It just goes to show that it's the point you were making earlier, which is you can't bolt it on. You can't take the process that they had and say, well, let's put computer vision and, machine learning and algorithmic computing on it and we're done. Like it doesn't change the needle. And they said, wait a minute, let's stop. Let's rethink the problem. Let's go back to this drawing board. Like, how can we sense it better? And now you've got this, musical tongue and it's getting them better results. And it's so true. It's a simple example we can relate to, but it's so true in every walk of transformation across like these business processes that we tangle every single day.
I think it's such a great example, and I want to transition to just the third piece that I want to talk about in your career. And I feel like you run the coolest club that no one has really heard of, and that everybody would probably give their, I don't know, 6 or 7 fingers to be a part of, right? So can we talk about this? The Executive Technology Board, this think tank that you created. Tell us about it, a little bit about it first, and how incredibly prestigious I find it to be.
Everything in life is an accident. This is another accident. I started this 4 or 5 years ago. I was running into problems I didn't even know how to approach. And I reached out to a lot of friends in the consulting world, great guys, I have deep respect for them. But like sometimes the altitude is a little different. And I couldn't get inputs at an operating leader level that I could put into practice. And then I reached out to all the analysts and good guys, and many of them work very closely, but sometimes it's too much detail. And so then I said, geez, I'm floundering. What do I do? And I started calling up people I work with. And of course, I work with amazing people through my career and so many different areas. And I just call you as an example. I say, Sam, you and I may have worked 10 years ago in San Francisco on this other thing or whatever, and hope you're doing well. By the way, I just hit something that I've never seen before. And I think you might have. And so how would you approach it? What would you do? How would you think about it? And I found like the quality input I was getting, mostly because the people I was talking to was just amazing. And then eventually those one-on-ones became two-on-ones, three-on-ones, and then it started growing. I started this kind of private club group, if you want to call it. And it took off. And now we're a global think tank. We have 126 as of today, CIOs, CTOs, CDOs, chief AI officers, and a couple of chief strategy officers of literally Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies across the world. But it's also a group that's very different. Like there's no presentations, there's no sales, there's no press, there's no media. It's just a peer group. And we set up meetings in person. There's no Zoom. You have to be in person. It's like a boardroom, right? So we bring a subset of that group. We co-create an agenda, and it's all of the hard topics, right? What is breaking? How are you solving for it? What did you learn? What are the questions you haven't answered? And then we just go around the room and kind of talk about it. And it's just it informs obviously my thinking, my investment strategy, my advisory strategy. So obviously there's a lot of benefit that comes of it. But really the biggest thing about it is we have a great community of like-minded peers that are all committed to this idea of collective intelligence.
When you think about who is going to be in this group, tell me about how you select the individual. Is it a checkbox of C-suite Fortune 500, or is it a little bit more than that?
So first off, Sam, I think we're grateful that we're at a stage in the evolution of that think tank that it's actually a group that people want to be part of. So actually, it's easy for me to bring people on board. Obviously, we're looking for C-level technology executives. We're looking for large global enterprises, because then you end up seeing a lot more of the problems broadly. But those are not the reason my members come on board. I mean, obviously, that's part of, that's required, but it's not sufficient. I think the biggest thing I look for is, I should look for two things. I look for humility. Everyone says, hey, we want to learn, but learning requires a lot of humility, and you have to have a lot of vulnerability to be in an organization saying, guys, I'm doing this. I'm messing up. It's not coming together. Like, it's not working out. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, just to say that, you need a lot of humility. And of course, you can say that, you get a lot of great inputs, but getting yourself there is a hard thing. And the other part is sharing. And the problem is, we're not like at some high level, hey, where's AI going to be in 10 years from now? We're like at the granular level of here and now. And so a lot of the information that gets shared is actually very, otherwise confidential. And, you need some experience to be able to articulate it. You have to abstract it out into a thematic that other people can use, but it can't be so vanilla that it's just kind of like just profoundly talking about life or something like that. And so you need experience to be able to do that. And so I look for this idea of humility and the experience that allows you to participate in a meaningful manner, both intake and give out. And then you bought into the idea of collective intelligence. And so that's a big part of why the magic of this group works, is because it's nothing to do with me. It's actually the people that are there. And it's important for me to preserve the integrity of that setup as we go forward.
I can't decide if this is going to be an easy question or one that stumps you, but I think the word of humility will resonate with so many people. And I think it's something that they also look for when they interview candidates for any role that they're interviewing for. How do you test for that? How do you pull out humility?
I mean, you can get to it in many different ways. I ask about their journey, just like you would in an interview situation. And if it's a lot of I, me, myself, then it's a red flag. If it's about, so-and-so stepped in to help here and I ran into this problem and don't know how to solve, and this other person helped me, then you kind of get a sense that they're able to work with people. And more importantly, they can recognize and bring in inputs from the outside. So that's a big part of it. You can also sense it from the community they're part of. If I were, for instance, it depends on how you're thinking about it. So if from an investment perspective, we do a lot of due diligence on the ecosystem they're from, and get a lot of back channel input. So those things are easy to ferret out. I think the bigger thing is knowing what you're looking for, because you can look for 600 things and that can completely confuse, but you have to distill it down to the three things that are most important for you.
Let me ask you one final question, which we ask all of our guests. What does it take to get a meeting with you?
It's probably different for different people. For me, it's the problem space. Like, I am intellectually fascinated by a few areas that I know a little bit about, by the way, and therefore insanely curious. And if someone picks up a thread that kind of pulls at something I'm curious about, then it doesn't matter who they are, where they come from, how they got introduced to me, whether they came in LinkedIn or somewhere else, it just fires up my curiosity, right? But I think the message there, and if I had to kind of look at it from the other side, is find something of super high interest to the individual trying to reach out to and yank that chain, right? Really. And I'm not saying it because I do it all the time, but it's done to me all the time and I can see it. And I know myself, I get very, very curious. And so I think that's probably the thing I'd leave you with.
I think a great tie to Show Me You Know Me, right? Understanding what it is that drives you, what's interesting to you specifically, Sanjay, finding a way to pull that thread, finding a way to stand out in the subject line of the email they send and the reference that they get from somebody you have in common. Find something that's worth your time or that would interest you, right, to earn that time with you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's so much fun. Thank you for having me.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Now, let's get into it to answer some burning questions from our audience. All right, who's ready for Sam Spills? Let's get into our Q&A. I often see executives post on LinkedIn. They don't get much engagement. What's going wrong here? Oh man, this is an easy one. So people are so excited to look at what executives are posting, but they're nervous to comment on it. So they'll get a lot of engagement. They'll get likes, they'll get claps, they'll get hearts, they'll get the whole 9 yards, and then they'll get like 4 comments. Why? Because you have to think of something to say to a super scary title like a chief revenue officer. So instead, think of it as an opportunity. This is a great option for you to be able to go in and add a comment. Imagine that that person is standing on a trade show floor. They're talking about whatever their post was, and they're surrounded by 137 people who are clapping for them, literally in a circle. Everybody's standing around them. They're like, this is a great post. Love what you said. And then one person, right, probably their direct report or their peer engages with it. Maybe their company page engages with it. And you're like, why isn't anybody talking to them? So you step out of the circle and you're like, hey, I have an opinion on that. I've got something to add to that. I've got a great question to ask you on top of that. That comment, right, builds connection, starts a relationship, and it stands out. There's not a lot of competition for you to be seen, so go get after it. Okay. Great Show Me You Know Me question. How can I find a good Show Me You Know Me if there's nothing going on in a prospect's LinkedIn profile? We've all been there, and so many of us sell to people who aren't on LinkedIn, who are non-existent on the platform, who don't post, let alone have a profile. So what I would tell you is, one, ChatGPT is your friend for this. So for whatever the client is that you're going after, let's say it's an obscure bank. What's going on with them? Have they been in the press lately? Have any of their executives spoken out? Have they been cited in publications? You can quickly ask ChatGPT for all of this stuff. You can also just self-research. Go to their website, look for press releases, look for any product releases they've had, look for things that they might sponsor from a charitable perspective, all things that you can connect on. What we're just looking for is something that, should we meet that prospect at a conference, we have some small talk about. So go find it. It doesn't have to be something that's related to what you're selling. It just has to be something that you can throw in the subject line and then you can create genuine human connection with. That's it for this episode, you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Hey, if you want to stay up to date with all that's happening at Sam Sales, check out our show notes. You'll find a link to subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out twice a week. And if I do say so myself, our Friday newsletter especially is packed with insights and pretty funny to boot.